Everyone, good morning. Happy Wednesday morning. Hope everyone is well. Just a quick check to make sure sound is working and everyone can see me. Please let me know if you can. But please, welcome to today's webinar session. This is our second webinar of this year, where we're actually creating a series, sorry, let me just go back, of various webinars that will hopefully take brands through this kind of current pandemic at the moment and what brands can do to see through it. So today we're looking at how subscription brands, as well as subscription brands and publishing brands can look at how you can start to retain your customers and your subscribers post-lockdown. So what we'll be looking at is how you can actually evaluate both the past, present, and actually hopefully look towards the future of your various consumer behaviors and what brands can do to actually update and optimize their retention strategies. So my name is Joel Mounsey. I am Head of Commercial Growth here at House of Kaizen. And today I'm joined by Katie Bloor, Head of Optimization, and Matt Robbins, UX Designer at House of Kaizen. And we are also very grateful to have Rich Rowe, who is a Performance Marketing Manager of Digital Subscriptions and Registrations from The Telegraph. So I think to maybe kick things off, Rich, I thought I wanted to pick your brains very quickly, just to get maybe your 2 cents on this topic of retention and maybe what yourself and The Telegraph are thinking and what they're doing in regards to retaining your current subscribers post-lockdown. If that's okay, if I'll pick your brains on that.
Yeah, absolutely, Joel. Thank you for having me, and thank you to House of Kaizen for this opportunity as well. I guess a little bit about my role at The Telegraph. I'm Performance Marketing Manager, overseeing digital subscriptions and registrations. So my role is predominantly focused on the acquisition side of things, but that in essence is the first start of the journey, really. We want to acquire that quality customer there and then in the first instance, and then almost work that with the retention team to ensure we keep those guys for the long run and maximize revenue and investment there. In terms of the topic at hand, it's been quite quite a strange time, really, in the sense that we've seen phenomenal growth in our subscription base, and that goes with saying that that's even with the case of having turned off all of our paid marketing back in March as well. So we've hit a higher number of subscribers than we originally forecasted for this time of year, UVs to our website are a record high. So obviously that's been driven by the news agenda and people just wanting to find the latest and the best opinions and insights of for everything around lockdown and coronavirus and what have you. So that in itself is obviously where the challenge lies in terms of how do we stay relevant with these people that have come in at this sort of peak time in the news agenda. And how can we ensure that we sort of keep hold of them sort of post-lockdown and beyond.
Great, thank you. I hope that kind of resonates with a lot of people listening on the webinar today. Obviously you've got sort of different situations and challenges that different brands are going through, but I think at the end of the day, we're all in the same kind of situation. So no, thank you for that, Rich. Word of warning before we go kind of into the webinar, you might hear 2 strange noises going on. I've got today, out of all days, I've got next door fitting in new windows, so you might hear some hammering and drilling. And then I've also got a 9-week-old little puppy who is constantly trying to get my attention, so you might hear a few yaps and barks and all of this. So don't be alarmed, stay focused. Hopefully it should be okay. Cool. So today's session, you've probably already seen the agenda, but we've got kind of 2 main topics we're going to be going through today, which Katie will be taking you through how you can make sure that your products and your service and your brand as a whole stays relevant and engaging to your consumers and sort of the new variation of consumers that you might have because of the lockdown, and then what you can do post-lockdown. to keep them engaged. And then Matt, our UX designer, will be taking you through how you can actually use UI design innovation within your e-commerce and digital channels, and making sure that you're pairing the kind of two together to really help inform your customer journeys and make sure they stay effective post-lockdown. Then finally, we've got our Q&A session. So we've got a panel which will be Katie, Matt and Rich. So throughout the webinar, please feel free to ask questions as we go along. I get like a little notification at the bottom, so I'll probably group them up towards the end and sort of read them out for you. So please feel free, any questions that come into mind, yeah, pop them in. Oh, excuse me. Go back. Right, cool. Quick nutshell on House of Kaizen. So we are an optimization and experimentation agency where essentially we help brands grow with our continuous, always on experimentation engine. But we make sure that we go far beyond the acquisition stage. So we're always looking at engagement, looking at retention, also looking at cancellation and churn. So we look at the entire customer life cycle. And then quickly, just to go through a bit more about us. So we've been around for 17 years. We're probably considered veterans in this space now. Offices both London and New York. We've got kind of a global presence, and we've worked with many different languages, helping brands across their different demographics to help optimize those experiences as well. And we're not a huge business, we're quite a close-knit team made up of 30+ passionate employees across research, our design and development teams. We've got our strategy and optimization teams and other consultants as well. And yeah, put it all together, we create this offering of continuous kind of experimentation for brands. Cool. So to set the scene for today's session and what Katie and Matt will be taking you through today, I thought we could just to relay kind of what the situation and the challenges that we are all in, and to really help frame what Katie and Matt will take you through. So I think it goes without saying, we are obviously in a bit of a strange period right now and potentially on the precipice of coming out of this COVID-19 lockdown. But I think fundamentally what we've all experienced is that what we knew about our customers and how they behaved, that has fundamentally changed. And whether rightly or wrongly, whether that's have a good or bad impact to your business, you can probably expect some sort of a change of situation yet to come. So what we're looking to do now is to really focus on how you can focus on the new behavioral changes and that criteria, and making sure you're staying aware. Then with the challenge that could pose for yourself within your organization, I think quite honestly, this is going to be the toughest era marketeers are going to have probably in their lifetime and potentially for generations to come. And what I think the tricky thing is that all this happened overnight. So it's been very difficult for a lot of marketeers and businesses to actually react as quickly as this change happened. And I think what we're going to experience is we are going to be in an extreme economy for the months, potentially years to come. So there is a need, I think, for marketeers and brands to stay aware, stay alert, as the sort of the government message is saying, and stay ready. This is kind of it. And so a couple of questions you might be thinking to yourself, and what we'll be looking to answer today is what should you do, and how can you prepare for changing habits now and in the future, but also what can you actually do to strategize now, update your retention strategy to make sure it stays aligned with the current climate, and make sure that the values that yourself and your brand provide customers and what your customers perceive of you stay and you can retain for both the short and long term. But also what can marketeers actually play and what can they do, and what practices can they apply to combat the risk of churn that may or may not be coming your way. So without further ado, Katie and Matt will be taking you through sort of the more strategic piece, and then obviously following on to the design and sort of design innovation. But please feel free to ask your questions as we go along. I'll pick them up and we'll do the Q&A towards the end. So Katie, I think this is over to you.
Yes, I'm just going to steal the screen from you. 1 second. Great. Hopefully you guys can see my screen. All good. So thank you, Joel, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us today as well. So obviously today we're focusing very much around the subscription industry, and as an industry, it's been one of the few actually that has seen such huge growth as a result of the pandemic. Within sort of that industry, acquisition is the growth has ranged from sort of 200 up to 700%. It's absolutely huge. So it's all well and good, and I think probably mostly right now, churn is staying relatively stable for most of you, at least from the conversations that we've been having with our clients. But I'm sure what you're starting to recognise is that while churn is stable now, such growth, usually churn does become a problem at some point. I think particular with the context of COVID, what this means is that everything is all good now, but the world will change again in a few months' time, and probably a few months' time after that. So going back to what Joel said, how do you continue to stay relevant? So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, very much focusing on sort of why it's going to become a problem, but more importantly, what you can be doing to try and prevent it becoming a problem. I'm going to try and do that in 10 minutes, so wish me luck on that. So just to start with, why is it going to be a problem? So there are many reasons why this could be a problem, ranging from the fact that when there is sort of this heightened perceived threat, our decision making, our behaviours are very different to normal. And what this means as well is that what you know about your customers, that potentially is now contextually invalid. These customers are very different to your previous cohorts of customers. But the two areas I'm going to focus on in this presentation are, firstly, the change in customer needs and problems. And I've got a slide after this just to help demonstrate this a bit better. But what it means is that the problems that your customers are having now, they might not be relevant in the coming months. And secondly, around sort of behaviours and habits. So new behaviours typically have a short half-life, and most importantly, habits. The ones that are most recently acquired are the most likely to go the soonest as well. So you may be creating a short-term habit now, but there is a high risk of that habit disappearing in a few months' time. So if we look at some of the various industries within subscription content streaming, the likes of Netflix, Disney+, they've seen such huge growth, and that's very much down to lockdown. People are trying to find new ways of keeping themselves entertained, keep their children entertained while they're out of school. Within the news, there's so much uncertainty in the world right now, and people are turning to the news more so than ever to really address that uncertainty, the anxiety that they are feeling, really by staying up to date with what's happening in the world. The gyms have all shut. People physically cannot go to the gym, so turning to fitness apps. And secondly, food recipe boxes. They saw such huge growth, they had to actually stop acquiring new customers. The demand was just so high. And this was very much due to the whole panic buying, people wanting to avoid queues in supermarkets. So the commonality between all of this is that these are finite and short-term needs. If these are the motivations of why customers are subscribing, what does that mean when lockdown is lifted and suddenly these needs aren't there anymore? And this is where you really need to start protecting your brand, because these needs will change and these habits will revert back. And this very much comes down to creating deep engagement. And here we're not just talking about, trying to get them to use the app once and signing up to a newsletter that maybe they read every now and again. We're looking for really deep engagement that's going to create long-term habits. And by this, we're talking about increasing the frequency in which your product is being used. Most importantly, the breadth of the product. So one of the things that we've observed with some of our clients is that new subscribers are engaging with very specific parts of the product. So markets content, economy content. But what about all that other great content that you have? What about all those other features like podcasts, newsletters, etc.? Really needing to try and increase how much of your product people are engaging with. And then finally, creating new needs with customers that these customers didn't even know that they had. We really need to kind of break them out of just this kind of silo need that some of them are seeing. And importantly, what that means for you guys is it will increase your retention and most importantly, customer lifetime value. And now is the perfect time to act. So in this diagram here, it's what's called the habit zone. So in this, what it does is it plots sort of the potential for your product to be able to create habits. Right now, sort of on the bottom, we've got the perceived utility. So that is how useful and rewarding it is for a user to use your product. And then the frequency as well, so how much they are using your product. Right now, with these subscription brands, they are right in that top corner. Your product is so relevant, it's such high utility, people have got a lot more time. But what it does mean is that as sort of lockdown starts to lift, perceived utility will naturally come down, and the frequency, the time that people have available, is also coming down. So really now is a time that you need to act. So in terms of how you actually create these habits, so there is no silver bullet, there is no sort of 3 things that you can just go and do and that's it, the habits are created. There's lots of different frameworks and methodologies for this. I'm just going to talk you through one today, and one that hopefully you can go away and start to do within your business. So there's 3 stages for this. The first one is to really identify who are your existing habitual customers and what does that actually mean for them to be an habitual customer. So as an example, it could be that they have 8 active days a month with your product. Secondly, with those customers, you need to look at the similar actions that they are taking and when they started to do these actions that made them become a habitual customer. This is what we call the habit path. So what did they do that made them a habitual customer? And then finally, we need to start modifying the existing experiences so that we can nudge new customers down this habit path. And with that, we'll start to create new habits. It's important as well to have a framework as well to really map these habits against. So this is just an example one, where it helps you to prioritize which habits and which actions you want to create. Here we've got on the bottom the impact on the retention rate, so high to low, and then also how likely they actually are to take that action. These are just some examples, but the ones that are in green are the ones that you really want to prioritize. You can't get everyone to take all actions at one time. There has to be some form of prioritization. And you also need to consider when is the opportunity to create these habits. So this is just an example diagram here from one of our clients we worked with. And what we saw from the data was that the first 100 days was really the window for creating habits. That is going to vary based on industry. It's going to vary based on if you do free trials, the length of those, typically how much people do engage with your product on average. But regardless of that, that's the first kind of onboarding window is always going to be the most important. That first day, immediately after they've purchased, that first week, that first month, that is really where everyone should be focusing to create habits. So at this point, what we know is the actions that new subscribers should be taking to help us create habits and the time frame in which they should be doing that. So now I'm going to look at how you can be modifying these experiences to really nudge people down this habit path. The first one is quantitative analysis. So this very much focuses on developing a data-driven visual representation of your existing onboarding journey and using data to really identify the performance at each touch point, the performance of each habit action. So how many people are downloading the app, how many people are signing up to newsletters, etc. And from here, we'll be able to identify the problem areas, the opportunity areas. And then by layering on qualitative analysis as well, we can really start to understand the why. What is it that's hindering people from taking this action? What anxieties are they feeling around it? But importantly as well, for those that do take that action, what is it that made them do it? What value do they see in that? And once we better understand that, we can then start to craft a better narrative to our new customers. And then finally, experimentation. So experimentation is absolutely key here, not just for sort of measuring new experiences, but for continuously iterating through experimentation. Matt will touch on this a bit later on the importance of experimentation, but typically what we have seen is that many brands are brilliant at running experiments within the acquisition journey, but when it comes into sort of the engagement, retention world, the experimentation really drops off, and now is really the time that it needs to change. And without that, brands are going to start falling behind. So the initial focus should be on building out that experimentation and onboarding for all of your customers. But it's important to also look at how you can build out a segmented approach. The segments really are going to differ by brand. We typically see differences with students versus non-students, for example, or what subscription did they purchase, what interests do they have. So it's important to start with all, but they do also look towards a segmented approach. So before I wrap up, I also wanted to share a case study with you from our work with the Wall Street Journal. So we've been working with them for about 4 years now, and in the last 2 years, we've very much focused on the engagement and retention side of the customer lifecycle as well. So through the exercise I just walked you through, there were 50 different habit actions that were identified. And you can see in the green, there are a lot of really good habits that we've started to focus on. So to begin with, their onboarding experience started on a thank you page, and people were auto-directed through to this sort of landing page where there was 4 actions presented. And these 4 actions were really based on what the business felt their subscribers should be doing. Through the habit data, we then completely re-optimized their entire experience. We ran maybe 20 or so different tests and continue running lots of tests every year on this. So we now have a full sort of on-site onboarding experience which prioritizes the different habits. There's a lot of interaction that can be done. You can actually sign up to newsletters within it. And again, Matt will talk a bit about that later. But just through this onboarding experience now, if people go through it, they have an 18% increase in retention rate. And we've also been working the last couple of years to create different nudges. So again, nudging people down that path. So that's in the form of email, so there's sort of welcome campaign, but also a re-engagement campaign. So if people didn't download the app, we will send them another app email in X many days' time. On-site targeting as well. So when they come to wsj.com, we've got various different placements that we now use to promote the different actions that they can be taking, and a re-onboarding experience as well. And then finally, nudges. So through this work, we also found that specific content, even specific authors, had a really high impact on retention. So creating ways to nudge people to engage with specific content, trying to bring them back to the site. And it's through all this work that WSJ have really future-proofed themselves, so that sort of in the months to come, when potentially churn could become a problem, they're in a good position where they've really protected themselves, hopefully, from that. So just before I hand over to Matt, just some key takeaways for you to take from today. So firstly, subscription brands need to be creating long-term habits in the customers now. And if they're not, they do risk having a big increase in churn. Right now is the time to act, as we saw in that habit zone. You're in a prime position, and it's absolutely the time to capitalize on this. To be able to create these habits, you need to really understand what is it that is making these sort of devoted habitual customers become these customers, to understand the habit path, and then using qualitative and quantitative data, modified experiences, experiment, and just deliver the best, most relevant experience to your customers. And that is all. So I hope that was useful for you all. I saw a few questions coming through, so hopefully I'd be able to address those in a bit later. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you.
Let me just do that.
Over to you, Matthew.
Yes, hang on, bear with me whilst I try and set this up. So if I do that.
Just a question that came in from, apologies if I don't pronounce it right, but Jose. So yes, we'll have we'll share the recording after. Excuse me. And yeah, so a lot of the stuff we'll be taking you through today, such as like the habit paths and stuff like that, we'll kind of be sending out a pack for you guys to use afterwards. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Mm-hmm. Right, there you go, Matt.
Great. Yes, can everybody see that okay? Is that all right, Joel? Cool. Okay, so thanks, Katie, for that. Hi guys, my name's Matt. I'm a designer at House of Kaizen. I'm going to be talking to you today about creating engaging customer experiences. Sorry. The importance of customer experience really can't be overstated. This particular statistic is about repurchasing. but it's still very similar to a subscriber retention, as they both represent a form of ongoing buy-in from the customer. Statistics like this basically clearly establish that link between creating an engaging customer experience and retention. And creating those experiences is what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about today. So Katie has talked a little bit about this behavior model that forms a basis for building a sustainable and lasting engagement habits with your users. This one is slightly different from hers, as it's more concerned directly with the design of the customer experience. It basically explains that triggering an action from a user is achieved through some combination of inspiring motivation, i.e. giving someone a reason to want to take an action, and agency, which is basically a fancy word for describing that mixture of awareness and ability needed to act on motivation, basically. My role as a designer is to work with our teams to create experiences that achieve both of these goals, to hit that sweet spot you can see on the graph there. This presentation will basically just be a brief exploration of a small handful of approaches that we've had success with in our work. So firstly, I'll look at some techniques we've used to inspire motivation in users, and then secondly, some techniques we've used to enhance user agency. So let's start with designing experiences that motivate. Motivation is actually quite a well understood phenomenon. This graph demonstrates the ideal pattern of motivation over time. Motivating someone to engage basically underpins most compelling media that you can think of. Almost every book, movie, and yes, customer experience follows this same basic pattern. You start with a baseline level of motivation, and that's the amount a given user is actually interested in what you're offering. And then, as you can see, I've highlighted in green here, that your experience has to stimulate an initial spike to take somebody from that baseline up to a peak of interest. Some users may be easier than others. It just depends on where their baseline motivation is. A good experience will then form this feedback loop with natural peaks and troughs of interest to keep people engaged and coming back for more. The difference between customer experience and, say, a movie is that we would like the experience to be continual and ongoing. There's no big climax and then a downward slope at the end. So let's start with stimulating that initial spike in motivation. Creative presentation is that thing that will stand out the most in an experience, and it will form the biggest and most lasting impression because it triggers emotional responses from the user. It can be this field can be fraught with like a lot of subjectivity because it's, you know, it's creativity, it's artistry, but you can actually use techniques like attitudinal testing to validate your creative approaches. This is the example. This is one such example, a 5-second exposure test. We're testing a few different color palettes there on the left, which, you know, for a campaign, let's say, but it could be anything. It could be messaging, it could be image concept, or even whole user interfaces. We then flash a sample to the target audience for about 5 seconds each in a controlled way. And we get them to draw either associations, or we can conduct user interviews to mine insight from that. And then you can take those insights and execute them or validate creative in this way. So you actually end up having data rather than just feeling around blindly with it. We've applied this methodology actually to great success on a recent design we did for the company Cylance, which is an antivirus firm. We tested a range of brand attributes, color, messaging, visuals on our likely audience, and the resulting design saw a huge boost in conversions. This is an acquisition task, but really it still speaks to the value of this kind of approach to creative because it still requires that buy-in from the user and stimulates that motivation. This same project demonstrates another really important principle, which actually has been backed up by a surprising number of studies into attention and retention. The fidelity, novelty, and creativity of your experience does matter. Human beings are attracted to these qualities and we tend to ignore things that look the same. So, for example, professionally shot stock photos to sell a benefit or feature of your site, they are better than nothing, but if you want to build the most trust in your brand, it is worth investing in the creation of custom assets that reflect your values and personality. People will engage with them a lot more. So in this Cylance example, rather than use some generic lifestyle imagery, we actually created and rendered out this cool 3D animated shield orb that tested well with our very techie audience for that particular project. There's a great Seinfeld quote, Jerry Seinfeld. There's no such thing as attention span. There's only the quality of what you're viewing. So once you've got someone's initial attention, how do you maintain it? You need to make it rewarding somehow. You need to provide ongoing value to them. One way of doing this with design is to make your interface intrinsically enjoyable to use. This example here uses interaction design and animation to accomplish this. It's quite exaggerated, but it's definitely memorable. You can liken it to creating a sort of like digital bubble wrap that's really satisfying to play with and inherently fun. It's critical to provide these types of experiential rewards because it acts as a powerful feedback mechanism, and it's actually substantially more, so research shows that it's substantially more powerful than incentives when you want to motivate people to continually engage, just creating those feedback loops. Perceived performance is also critically important. Your pages and apps must be fast and free of glitches. There's a very steep drop off in user attention, so the penalty can be quite high. Amazon reported a 1% increase in revenues, bearing in mind the size of Amazon's group, just by reducing page load times by 100 milliseconds. You can actually fudge this a little bit with some very clever design, but we don't have time to go into all those techniques today. Another interesting thing we've noticed is that interactive features can be a lot stickier. Retention and habits can be a lot stronger when something is actually required of the user beyond simply passive consumption. If you want to increase overall engagement, consider exposing users to more features that they have to actively participate in. This example here from the onboarding flow that Katie described in her presentation is the Wall Street puzzles section. So once you've got your motivated users, how do you enable them to act on it? By designing to maximize their agency. Tutorialization is a fantastic way of doing this. Signposting features and giving users a clear idea of what to expect is an excellent way of improving engagement. Once they've expressed motivation, you can feed them more information to hold their interests and to keep them on that ideal motivational curve. When informing users about a mobile application, we had a lot of success with using this kind of interface view, which both demonstrates features, functionality, and sets user expectations correctly. This is actually very important because when you're explaining a feature or benefit that you want users to engage with, if you do not set their expectations properly, you're likely to experience a drop-off once they actually arrive at the experience. As Katie mentioned before, we've had a lot of success with this onboarding/re-onboarding piece for the Wall Street Journal. There are a lot of features that justify the value of that subscription, and this has been a very important tool for keeping users informed about the existence of and how to access all of those benefits, because there's just such a huge amount there. The most important component of agency, though, is choice, giving the users the ability to express their intent within the experience. On the same onboarding flow, we tested implementing a way to navigate around benefits. Typically, the users actually had to progress linearly through the flow from one step to the next. In this design, we created a navigation that would allow them to visit any of the desired features that they wished. The data we got testing this matched our hypothesis. The volume of total engagement went down, but engagement with specific features went up, which signifies that when users were able to freely get to where they wanted, they were far more likely to engage with the content there, expressing how powerful this can be when creating the kind of desirable engagement we want, which is born out of a desire to extract value. It is possible to overdo user choice, though. A lot of neuromarketing studies now point to cognitive overload as a significant reason for a loss in user attention. A combination of user accessibility testing and well-applied design methodology can usually combat this issue. Dark patterns have recently become a more prevalent method in the e-commerce sector. They're advantageous because they can be an easy path to increasing a specific KPI. Examples of these patterns are all over the internet, but they typically involve harming user agency in an experience by seeking to misinform or misdirect. Things like fictional timers or bogus reviews, you know, we've seen a lot of them, they're all flowing around. This could end up doing lasting damage to a brand. A huge majority of users would leave a brand after a few negative experiences, and they're progressively wisening up to these practices. So even though they may work today, they may not work tomorrow, and you won't know when that happens. I've noticed this is particularly prevalent when the customer wishes to take an action that the business doesn't want, like unsubscribing. So the eagle-eyed may work out who this particular company is. I won't name names, but you can see what they've done there. It's employ a sneaky tactic with the unsubscribe CTAs. They've deliberately subverted user expectation regarding the placement and aesthetic of the primary CTA, i.e. the main reason why the user is there, which is to unsubscribe, to try and retain them. This probably improved on that KPI, but we intuitively understand that this would negatively impact user experience in some way. Here's another nameless example for another company. I wrote a small bot to crawl social media and forums to collate some feedback regarding the anti-user agency practices here. It's important to consider that the cost of shortchanging good design principles to hit KPIs without performing qualitative and brand metric assessments after the fact, you may be missing the damage that these types of things may be causing you. So these words here were essentially just a collation of the highlights from people's feedback regarding that experience, basically. This is very important because with an influx of new users who've placed trust in your brand, if you violate that trust easily, you will likely lose them as customers for a very long time. So all of this advice is a moot point without a good strategy for implementation. Every customer base is different, and you do not want to be caught out if consumer behavior rapidly changes like it is now. A proper testing strategy is more relevant than ever when it comes to achieving your engagement goals. Hopefully you're all familiar with A/B testing. This is where we set up different experiences, designs, messaging, etc., and test them under controlled conditions and measure relative performance. It's a good way of towards iterating, towards a higher and a better performing customer experience. If you were to zoom out and view these tests as a continuum, with each of these slim gray bars representing some different variation, you can see the previous 4 tests as those sort of 4 green bars in the middle there. The further away a variation is, the more drastically different the design. So bars that are close together represent similar designs, bars that are further away represent more radical changes. This is a simplified visual map to map the peaks and troughs in performance and to see how your customer responds to different stimuli and different experiences. Our job as optimizers is typically to perform a form of gradient descent. This red dot here represents your current experience, and our job typically is to move that dot further up the performance curve. The important takeaway here, though, is that even during normal times, you may be optimizing your design towards some local maximum, the peak of that mountain there that you can see in the middle, without the knowledge that a more radical change in your design could help you find a much bigger global maximum of performance. This typically happens when you make small changes to one design and you sort of exhaust the potential of that design because you, rather than taking bigger risks to see and learn about consumer behavior in general. So this highlights the need to continuously test and experiment, sometimes in very radical ways. Covid-19 has also complicated things a lot. As Joel and Katie outlined, consumer behavior has changed a lot. So the insights and assumptions you made about your customers with previous testing may not continue to apply. They may not, and maybe similarities, but you have to test to find out. This further emphasizes the need, though, to continue to experiment during this period. So to test properly, you need to test a combination of big and small ideas. You need to find fertile new ground and iteratively improve on it. You need to always test experiences with a hypothesis to build your proprietary knowledge. You need to accurately measure and score these things in order to build a bigger picture of your landscape. And you need to not get stuck on a local maximum, which is that trap of getting stuck on a local peak of performance rather than trying to see the bigger picture. There's so much more I would have loved to have covered on this topic. I could go on for days about it, but there's a couple of honorable mentions I would like to talk about. Content personalization, which is basically where you configure the persuasive arguments towards your audience. You can do this dynamically or with questionnaires and so on. But that's a very effective way of getting people to engage with a specific piece of content. GA or dynamic testing is things where you would use, it's a cutting edge technique where you use machine learning algorithms to essentially produce a survival of the fittest design methodology where it constantly iterates through the designs automatically. But yeah, unfortunately, I could only cover these four. So the first one, just to remind you, was to spark initial engagement using novel, creative, and attitudinal testing. You need to reward engagement with interactivity, which can create powerful feedback loops to continuously drive engagement. You need to empower user agency with tutorials and the ability to choose. And finally, you need to continuously experiment, because that's what's going to lead you to understand consumer behavior in the best way. Cheers.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Matt. I hope everyone found those two kind of presentations from Katie and Matt super useful. I appreciate that was a lot to go through. So yeah, I hope you had your pens and papers ready and taking notes. But by all means, look, we are more than happy to kind of delve deeper on any of this. So feel free just to reach out to us. Yeah, and we can obviously just help you out. But yeah, as I said, I appreciate it's a lot to go through, a lot of detail. I know Matt said, you wish you had a lot more time to go through what you wanted. Yeah, by all means, reach out and we can help you out. So Q&A time. So a couple of you come in with quite a few questions, and Rich, there's quite a long list for you. So we'll go through them, but I think there's one interesting question. Actually, no, before we move on to that, Rich, I'd actually like to put the question forward to you.
Yeah.
So your thoughts, your perspective on what we just went through. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, a whole wealth of ideas and really great sort of insights there in terms of how that speaks to what we've been trying to conduct at the Telegraph. I think that, yeah, like I said at the top of the call and what have you, this has presented a unique opportunity, and I think that one of the things that we're trying to do is certainly try to treat this cohort of subscribers that have come in during the lockdown and via coronavirus content and the like as a kind of singular cohort, and almost like as soon as they've come in, the clock has been ticking to learn as much about them as possible, and with a view to sort of see, well, we've got their attention now, and they've hopefully we're sort of giving them the view that there's a lot of value in our product and our opinions and our writing, and hopefully then once we've come out of lockdown and I guess coronavirus sort of disappears from the news agenda, what do we have for them next is the question that we've been trying to answer. So as well as making coronavirus as much of an engaging and what have you informative topic as it is then also, well, when normal life returns, what are they also interested in, and how do we put that in front of them, and how do we speak about all the other great journalistic work that we do around all of our sort of subjects and content.
Awesome. One question for you, because actually your perspective on this is, I think, quite unique. I think it's really good to have you, because I know obviously you sit more probably on the acquisition side, and yeah, I think your sort of visual on the retention aspect, you get a different perspective. And I think there's a challenge for many subscription brands where you get the acquisition team and then the retention team, and whether it's your case or not. Have you traditionally been working in quite siloed manner, and has that kind of changed recently because of the pandemic? Like, is there much more kind of grouping together to make sure that the business is getting that holistic view? Yeah,
I think in terms of, I think both teams separately have been on journeys in terms of improving the quality of the work that we both do as separate teams. I'd say that if we dial the clock back a year ago, we were certainly more focused on volume now as an acquisition team, and now we're focused on volume but quality. So having that view of what are our best quality sources of subscribers in terms of paid channels, That's what we're tasking ourselves with as a team. And hopefully there's a knock-on effect then that we're lightening the work that's needed to be done by the retention team. On the retention team side of things, I know that they're probably guilty of being or applying far much more sort of granular and intellectual approaches to customer journeys, and to the point where they've had a whole myriad and convoluted map of possible routes for a customer to be sort of driven down or what have you. So they've gone through a bit of a rejig in the sense of simplifying that whole process and approach, and actually look where the volume is, where the data is, and have more streamlined journeys there. So separately, those are the things that we've been sort of tasked with. And I think that we're starting to get to the point where actually, can we have a tailored journey for a specific paid channel? And certainly that speaks to how we've evolved recently in widening our approach and including things like affiliates and what have you into our marketing mix, where there's a bit more of a need to perhaps nurture a subscriber than perhaps someone who's come in from a piece of paid content that's been posted on Facebook, where there's that quite obvious initial intent in that interest or subject. So we're moving in that direction. Certainly, we're still quite in our infancy as a singular subscriptions business, but yeah, it feels like we're certainly on the road towards progression there.
Great, thank you. Right, Katie, we've got a question for you. Hold on, let me just find that one. So this one's from Alison. So they've just launched a minimum viable product, and sort of the data surrounding that is quite limited. So her question was, are there any ways that we can start with habits in those early stages of that development of the product?
Yeah, definitely. Like Alison said, you're not going to have all the data from day one, and it does take time to collect that data, to analyse it. To begin with, I think within businesses, typically there is a sense of like, what are the core parts of your product? And it depends on obviously what product we're talking about here. Is it news content? Is it video streaming? But there are going to be sort of core fundamental parts of your product. And it's important to look at each of those and understand, okay, well, how much are people engaging with these? How many people are engaging with each of these? And that's really a good place to start. And you'll start to identify some of the opportunities there. So for example, this app, for example, that is a core part of our product, but actually only 20% have downloaded it. And of that 20%, only 10% are active in it. That is a core part of a product that people are paying for, and therefore people expect to see some form of value from that. So that's always a good place to start. And to be honest, once you start down that path, there is so much to do that will kind of keep you very busy in terms of trying to sort of create engagement within those, while in parallel starting to sort of collect that data to inform the habit strategy.
Awesome. Great. Matthew, I think you'll enjoy this one. So, as you know, a question for all, but Matt, I imagine you're going to put your hand up first. So actually it's two very similar questions, one regarding BT Sport and one regarding Netflix. I'll see if I can try and combine them somehow. But one regarding Netflix, they recently announced their intention to auto-cancel subscriptions for customers not utilising the platform, but still paying for it. Clearly, this is more about gaining trust rather than minimal revenue loss. Do you think publishers will follow this strategy in the race to drive loyalty with consumers? Before you answer that, the one related to BT Sport was how they actually made it difficult for consumers to cancel, and the backlash that ensued for them. So the question for that was also how their lateness to the game of understanding what customers wanted when they needed it. How do you think that kind of affected their long-term retention strategy? So over to you, whoever wants to pick that one up.
Yeah, I would just say on the Netflix case, like it's obviously great they're doing that, and it will help reduce some anxiety that people might have. And it's one of those payments, isn't it? For a lot of people, it will just come out of their accounts and they won't necessarily notice it on a monthly basis. It gives them that peace of mind. But I do think there is sort of a middle ground that publishers could go to first, which is more around, rather than just leaving them and, you know, just that payment keeps going through, is proactively saying to them, oh, we can see you've not used your subscription in X amount of time, big reminder of all the wonderful things that they're missing out on, or potentially suggesting they move to a different subscription. Maybe it's not actually the best subscription for them. So I think there's other things that can be done. But I do also think that if I think about the US market in particular, there's a lot going on there around making cancellation easier. So now if you buy a subscription online, you have to be able to cancel it online. That is going to be coming soon, and it's already active in California. I can see something like this also becoming just the normal in a year or two's time. So that's, yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens and evolves there.
Yeah, I think Netflix has somewhat benefits from a first mover advantage here, in that the revenue lost functions in some part. The fact that we're talking about it and the fact that there's news stories about it, it does function in many ways as like a bit of marginal marketing spend as well. Obviously, the more ubiquitous it becomes, the less impactful it is, because it's less of a differentiator. But you know, with respect to the BT thing, like I covered in my presentation, those type of negative experiences, people are wising up to them, and it's consumers demanding more and more that a customer experience treats their right to choose more fairly. And yeah, laws are being introduced in the US to make it easier. So I do agree with Katie that before I'd say cancelling just on behalf of the user before you know anything about why they're not using it. I mean, it really depends on the you know, the time scale. But you definitely should make a concerted effort to try and re-engage people first, because if you believe your product, they subscribe because they believed your product had something to offer and something to value. So you need to try and remind them of that fact, and to try and trigger that reminder in them. And then even after those persistent attempts, it could be, you know, it could absolutely be something that people look into. You probably don't want that kind of dead weight on your books anyway, because it misrepresents like your engagement at that point. If you have a bunch of dead subscribers who aren't actually using your product.
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, I think it's in a similar way. We wouldn't kind of just let someone just cancel, and similar to what Matt, you were just saying. I think we would do our best in all situations to re-engage, to identify where there's been the lack of usage, what have you, and then try to service that with correct messaging or correct signposting to either more content or benefits from our subscription. But yeah, interesting move by Netflix. The kind of cynic in me says there was a lot more PR to be won from that move, but in actual fact, it's probably, hopefully, it's kind of set the trend then for other subscription models, other publishers to kind of follow suit and see the sort of benefit of doing this sort of thing.
I mean, it's a tricky one, because obviously the cancellation bit is the direct impact of churn. So I think obviously there's this balance that needs to be had between brands wanting to keep the customers, but also I think going back to your point, Matt, which is was it agency ability, make sure that you are giving customers the freedom so that it doesn't turn into a negative experience.
And also trust. I mean, like, trust is a really important thing. Like for me, I you know, just speaking from personal experience, I may have a subscription I don't use for a while, but then if I was to suddenly log into Netflix and go, wait, what happened? I thought I had a Netflix. So it is one of those things. It's actually very difficult to draw the line and say, yeah, this is absolutely right and this is absolutely wrong, even from a purely user agency perspective, you know.
Good. All right, well, we've got 4 minutes left. So if anyone does have any questions, please ask them now, so we're going to be ending in 4 minutes. But I think there's one, question that I think has always been on my mind. I think it's been on everyone's mind because of COVID. It's about budgets. So actually a question I think for you both, Rich and you, Katie. Katie from like the agency side, who kind of works with brands, and obviously from a Telegraph perspective for you, Rich. But many brands are also facing the challenge of tightening marketing budgets, which is obviously quite clear. How can you create the business case for investment in retention? So, Don't all stand up at once. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us at the Telegraph, we spent a great deal of time and resource in identifying what creates like sort of next best actions or next best behaviours for our subscribers. So for us, it has been quite clear that there's been a need to invest in that area, and we've kind of fleshed out our retention team to service that to that extent as well. So you know, in the same way, like I said earlier, like if the acquisition team can find those quality subscribers in the first instance, then we make the retention teams life's easier. In the same way, if the retention team can nurture and grow an existing subscriber base to retain and use all of our products and services, then they will be more likely to continue their payments. Then that makes our lives easier as well. We don't have to sort of turn the dial up as high as it needs to be in order to pay off the kind of balance between acquisition and retention. I realise that's a fairly generic answer, but that's ultimately like how we view it at the Telegraph, really.
I think to add to that as well, so one thing we've seen worked well, really, in the fact that the reason people tend to focus experimentation strategy on acquisition is because it's very easy to demonstrate ROI. You know, an extra conversion equals X amount, and for the more engagement and retention focus, it can sometimes be a little bit harder to sort of model that out on like just whenever you need to. What we've seen work well is actually looking at, okay, so for the customers who download and use the app, what is their retention rate? For those that engage with newsletters, what is their retention rate? And from there, working with your finance team, you can then actually start to extrapolate, okay, so that increase in retention, that is X many more months that they are paying us for. What does that then actually mean in terms of money? And then you can start to model out, okay, well, if I have a 10% increase in app downloads, what does that actually mean? And quickly, those numbers do add up. And I'm saying for the Wall Street Journal, the work we've been doing there, that the engagement sort of vertical, as we call it, the engagement strategy team, that is actually where the biggest budgets are focused from optimization right now, because they just get such a big ROI on the work that we are doing there. So yeah, that would be sort of my advice as a place to start as well.
Okay, but I think or at least in my opinion, tell me if I'm wrong, but for marketeers who can't get that investment, as we all know, optimization typically always goes up an upward trajectory on return on investment, right? It's kind of a no-brainer. But for brands or marketeers that can't get that additional investment, that's purely because there's a disconnect between how marketers are working with the finance department. Because I think now it's the finance department who are holding the budget, and then because of what happened, they're just saying, right, cut costs, stop, and therefore marketers are kind of left stranded. Is that kind of the case, or is that maybe too naive?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the need to join up as many data sources and points and different views of sort of chopping and cutting the data is obviously a continual battle for all marketers, regardless of how big or small your budget is. And yeah, it's if your budgets are restricted or tight, it's just finding that way to see where the opportunity is. Like all optimization and retention programs start at some point, and that 9 times out of 10 is where there is the greatest opportunity, because there's the most amount of data, and it's how you can prove a business case to then evolve and expand beyond that as well. So yeah, if there is a way to kind of zero in on where you see the starting point being, that it's very difficult for someone from your C-suite level to kind of deny you that opportunity if you build that business case from that point onwards.
Yeah, proof of concept is a great place to start, because as soon as people can actually see a tangible result, then people do begin to start listening quite quickly.
Yeah, great. Right, 1 minute over time. I think we did very well. That was a lot of detail. So sorry if anyone's got webinar fatigue. Your brains are fried for the rest of the day, but there is a lot of information in there, I know. But yeah, I hope you found it really useful. We'll be following up, hopefully with each of you, just to get your thoughts on the webinar, see if there's anything we can help with, if you've got any questions, stuff like that really. And just, I think it's always good just to kind of touch base and sort of get to know you all. So I think we'll call it there. Unless there's any other questions from anyone. I take the silence as no. Cool. All right, everyone, thank you very much for attending. We'll be doing another webinar probably in another couple of weeks. So please stay tuned. We'll reach out, let you know what the topic is. Please register. And yeah, we'll keep in touch and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you, panelists. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys.